Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Comic Source Podcast. I'm your host, Jace. Today, we're going to talk about a recent book that was released focusing on one of my favorite characters, the Hulk. It's called Incredible Hulk, World Breaker, Hero Icon. The author, Rich Johnson, longtime comic book industry veteran, is here to talk all about it. So, Rich, thanks for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure, Jace. So why is Hulk one of your favorites?
It goes back to the Bill Bixby TV show when I was a kid. That was my
Okay.
introduction. That and the Super Friends cartoon really were my kind of gateway why I wanted to, uh, you know, collect and read comics. Actually, I've told this story in the podcast many times, but I was on a trip, first grade camping trip. My mom used to take me, like, as soon as I could read, that's all I wanted to do. My mom used to take me to the library once a week, and I got this Charlie Brown book, and it had an article in there or a few chapter, what have you, about collecting things. And it had different examples, stamps, bottle caps, coins, and
Yes.
comic books was one of them. I was like, I love to read, and the little store by my grandparents' house had comics. I was like, I'm gonna collect comics. I want to collect something that sounds cool. I get to read, and that was just yeah. So that was like 5 years old, and it just took off from there. So yeah, how about you? What do you have a specific reason that you've done the whole? You've done a few others. We'll talk about that in a second. But why the
Yeah, I
whole?
did. Well, I mean, Hulk is certainly, of the he's one of the first Avengers, as you know, as you probably know. So he's one of the mainstays. He's been a huge part of the MCU and the comic scene for a long time. So it just makes sense to do the Hulk.
Yeah, and for those of you watching us on YouTube, you can see back behind Rich, he's got his other two volumes of this hero icon on his shelf there. So Captain America, Avenger, hero icon, Spider-Man, web slinger, hero icon. So plans to do more of these in the future?
Yes, there are two more coming out. While it's not listed on Amazon yet, so you can't do pre-orders yet, I'm finishing up the Avengers. Will be the fourth one in the series. There'll be five total.
So I got a chance to check out a digital copy. I was saying before we recorded, I have to go buy a physical copy or I'll order it from Amazon, what have you, because I can't wait to really dive deep into it. Give us a little bit of an idea of kind of the structure and what this is, because it is a mixture of prose, but you also have plenty of examples of different eras that are actually pulled from the comics. So give our listeners an idea of
Yeah.
layout.
Well, the idea between me and Jessica Fuller, our editor over at Rizzoli, um, was you walk into a bookstore or a library or a comic shop and there's a wall of Marvel and DC books and it's 80, 60, 80 years of publications. And you may have gone to see the movie, you may have seen the TV show, and your brain kind of goes on fire, like, where do I begin?
Hmm.
How do I start this journey that I want to take with these superheroes? So the guide is broken up into what you need to know about the characters in order to sort of enjoy the story. In a way, it's a guide. So the easiest way to get it is with the Captain America book. We level off at private, corporal, sergeant, and captain. So at the private level, for those stories, you really need to know very little about Captain America to know what's going on. And the higher you go up in the chapters, the more continuity you need to know about the characters in order to understand the story better. And then, of
So
course, we pull art from all the different stories that we've decided to write about. And that process is, I ask friends, fellow fans, scour the internet, what are the best Hulk stories? And I make up a list. And then we send it out to Rizzoli and Marvel, and they give their opinion, and we go back and forth. And we cut it down to about 30 stories per book that we talk about.
yeah, and what's interesting when we talk about the Hulk versus these other two characters you've done before, in a way, the Hulk has gone through more change in a lot of ways. There's sort of different versions. I mean, obviously, more recent Captain America, there's the Falcon era and what have you, when or when Bucky was or Barnes was wearing the costume or what have you. With the Hulk, there's been all these different iterations. You got the Green Hulk, you got the Gray Hulk. There's times where he's been more of savage and kind of
Yep,
unintelligent in the Hulk persona. Other times where it's been almost an amalgamation of Bruce Banner and the Hulk.
sure.
So I sort of feel like it maybe was a little tougher to pin down different eras of the Hulk to focus on giving somebody an overview.
It is a little bit. And then you've also got the times when Banner is sort of the out of control one,
Hmm.
when he's going through his crises and his mental breakdowns, and he ends up at an island like the island of Dr. Moreau, and he's trying to build a way to make basically other Hulks out of things, and suddenly you've got a dinosaur Hulk and a dog Hulk. It's just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So you're correct, he does change over time. So the stories, I mean, there are certain ones that just pop out, you got to do. World War Hulk, Planet Hulk, you got to do those. Plus they're fodder for the movies too, for some of
Hmm.
the movie stuff. So I think one of the difficulties with Hulk is that, as you said, the different versions of him, sometimes he's a bit of a villain because he goes crazy and does destructive things. And sometimes he's the good guy who's the Avenger or the superhero helping people out. So much like the character itself, the stories can be a little schizophrenic, as he is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you have a favorite era? Like if you had to pick one or two favorite eras of the Hulk?
There's a Peter David story that we did. It was I'm trying to, you're going to task me now. It was a sequel to one he had done like 10 or 20 years earlier, where it was short and sad. It was a shriveled old man wandering a post-apocalyptic Earth. It's Bruce Banner, and he just can't die. I thought that was just really moving and interesting. So I did like that part. I also liked quite a bit Planet Hulk and World War Hulk. How about you? Did you like the earlier stuff better? Where he's more of the, Hulk smash, Hulk, run around and
Yeah,
break things?
as much as I appreciated the recent Immortal Hulk run, and I've talked to Al Ewing, he's been on the show to talk about it, and it was interesting getting back to that very first issue, Man or Monster. I think it goes back to my love of the Bill Bixby TV show and sort of wanting that man against the world feel, where he's kind of on the road,
Yeah.
he's being hunted. So I go back to kind of the Bill Mantlo era and kind of after that pardon when he lost control again and was out on the road and people were hunting for him. I think that's probably, but again, you go back to when you're 12, 13 years old and that's
Yeah.
things
Oh
that,
yeah, that's big, a big same with me for comics. That's how I get into reading. I think my mother, she would give me an allowance. She was a single mom living with her mother, and she'd give me an allowance, and I'd go to the local grocery stop, mom and pop grocery shop, and there'd be stacks of comics, and I'd pick up, all my favorites. Um, and then of course, I had a sort of a falling out with comics in high school, and then what dragged me back in was in 1986, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns,
okay, yeah.
where I sort of like, what is this thing? And then I got back into it. So for the whole interesting that you got into it early on via TV. So did it bother you that the stories were a little bit different? Like he was named David Banner in the show. So when you got to the comics and it was Bruce Banner, did that bother you at all?
It didn't. And then, getting into it, and I'm just had the type of personality when I get into something like I dive whole hog. And so, I came along later enough. There were interviews from Stanley and he was talking about even Stan would mess up names once in a while. And so it wasn't a big
I've
deal.
read that. Yeah. He
Yeah.
would forget.
Yeah. He would forget. And so it's not a big deal, Robert David Bruce Banner, what have you. But it is interesting. You go back for those that don't know that the guy that like produced the TV show, he didn't want him to be green, and that was like a line in the sand that Marvel,
Yeah.
like, yeah, he wanted it to be more serious, more realistic, but I think it worked. I mean, it's still you can still watch it on Peacock, and it's still great.
Yeah. I got the Blu-ray set of it. So
Yeah.
and the movie Hulks, what was your opinion of those?
I love the Ed Norton one. I went nothing against Mark Ruffalo, but I would have liked to see Norton continue in the role. Do you have a favorite live action Hulk?
I do like Ruffalo a lot. I can see your point though with Norton. Norton as an actor, alone is just seems like a tortured soul.
Yeah.
So he really kind of fits the Bruce Banner mold. Um, I really did love at the end of the films when Ruffalo became merged them together.
Yeah.
You know, was the had his brain inside of the Hulk's body.
Yeah, that's another one of my favorite eras. That kind of goes to the Peter David. I think Professor Hulk is kind of the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's another one of my
And
one of,
did you like Amadeus Cho as the Hulk?
I haven't read a lot of the show stuff. That was kind of in the middle of me changing careers around that time. And so while I was still buying a few comics, haven't read them all. So I have
Yeah.
a run of Totally Awesome Hulk. I've never read a single issue of it.
I found those interesting because one, he wore the proper pants. They were never torn.
Right.
He was, he figured out a way to construct a pair of pants that would, expand and contract with him. Um, and because he was a young sort of arrogant kid. sort of in the vein of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, where
Mhm.
he had flippant remarks and stuff. So I thought that level of humor was sort of interesting with the Hulk.
Yeah, the other thing that Marvel has done very successfully, DC to a lesser extent, you kind of think about these families, right? Like it's not just Bruce Banner as the Hulk. You know, you mentioned Amadeus Cho, but we've also got She-Hulk that has a couple of chapters in the book, and Red Hulk. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other characters? And there's a villain in there as well.
Actually, what I really loved about She-Hulk was even on the cover, she just breaks the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Very Deadpool-ish later on. Um, I think there was even one cover where she threatens to come to your house and rip up all your X-Men comics if you don't buy this issue.
Yeah, that's on
I
the
think this when they relaunched her. It might have been the first issue. I'm not quite sure. But I thought she was just a fun character. Um, and I liked that they made her very smart. They made her a lawyer. I think they did right by her. And she seemed to be very charming. And the actress who plays her on the TV show, I've only seen the first episode. I haven't seen all of it. Um, she was an Orphan Black. I'm blanking on her name. My daughter would kill me right now because she is one of my daughter's favorite actresses because of Orphan Black. I'm just blanking on her name. Um, I thought she was a good choice for the role. Have you seen the show yet?
I haven't. I haven't. I'm not. Tatiana.
Muslani.
Yeah, Maslany. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
No, I haven't. Listeners of the podcast will know I feel guilty when I watch the movies or TV shows because I think I need to be reading comics and putting out podcasts. I'll get to that. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. I'm up. I've actually caught it. There was a long time I hadn't even seen the first Avengers. I'm up to Doctor
You
Strange.
haven't?
I have now. I have now. The
Okay.
pandemic gave me time to get caught up. But as far as the MCU, I've seen everything up to Doctor Strange. Haven't seen Doctor Strange, the first one, or anything that's come after it yet. So I haven't seen Endgame yet or any of that. I'll get
You
there.
haven't seen, dude.
I know. 12
Jeez.
12-year-old me would kick my butt. But yeah, focus more on the source material. But you mentioned She-Hulk, and that's a good, definitely a good character because she came so early, right? She came in the 70s. There's a Savage She-Hulk section that talks about, her origin and what have you. Maybe that's a good segue to talk a little bit about, we mentioned they're broken down into chapters and it gives you kind of an overview of what you need to read in order to understand that sort of part of the history of the character. How do you decide what to go in there? Because ultimately you want this to be a guide, like you said, and you don't want to spoil it because you want people to go and read the source material and enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the goal.
Not
Yeah.
that challenge.
So in the writing, I try to give I've been in sales for a long time. I was a VP of sales at DC Comics. I'm in sales now at Book Distributors. Um, I worked at Scholastic in sales. When you go pitch a book, what you have to do, because on average with a buyer, like if you're going to Barnes and Noble, you've got like a minute to pitch the book. So you have to condense the story down as well as you can in order to convey it to grab the attention of the buyer, right? So I have a little more, these are about 450 words or so. So I try to give enough of the story to intrigue you and try to throw in a couple of little fun facts, both from as what do they call me? The description of the Hulk, they call me a nerdy insider, my nerdy insider facts about stuff, and try to make it where the reader's going to go, yeah, I want to know more about that. Plus the art is there to help sell it too. The art is gorgeous. It's blown up some of the panels. It's really an effective tool, I think, and just a beautiful art book to take a look at. So I just try to hook you a little bit and get you enough that you're going to want to, go to the library, go to the comic shop, go to the bookstore, wherever, go on Marvel Unlimited and look up the stories.
Yeah, and there's reference in the back. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the other thing I don't want to touch on, you mentioned the art. That's the thing. Like you could have done a more deep dive into the history by having more prose and less artwork. But you're right. I mean, this is to get people interested in the comic medium. It is a perfect marriage of visuals and words. And you're right. This is an amazing art book because you start off with Jack Kirby, right? And you've got the John Byrne stuff, and then you've got John Romita Jr. When Jones is writing. I mean, it's a good overview of not just kind of the history of the Hulk as a character, but also the art that has defined certain eras of the character.
And in some ways, just a history can, I think, get a little stale and it may be a little bit boring. I mean, this is, let's talk about the stories. Let's talk about, kind of what made the Hulk or Captain America or Spider-Man or the Avengers, those characters. What made you love them? It was these stories that you connected with. You've mentioned a few specific stories. You asked me what my favorite stories were, and I could do that for Captain America and Spidey and Avengers. There's certain ones that just kind of grab you and you. One of my other favorites, now that I think about it, is I've always been a huge fan of Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale.
Oh yeah.
Huge fan, just an enormous fan. And that dates back to even before I started working at DC Comics. I was reading A Long Halloween,
Mhm.
which became a real staple at DC in their book program. Um, and he did Hulk Gray, he did Spider-Man Blue, he did Daredevil Yellow, and Captain America White. And those are ones that you don't need to know a lot about the Hulk, but the art in that, as compared to John Romita Jr. or even Alex Ross, who I adore, is a friend of mine. Um, you got to just admire that art, and it's so accessible and so gorgeous. And when you see it blown up, one page blown up on a book this size, it really kind of stops you in your tracks.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a huge loss when we lost Tim Sale.
Yeah.
Well, we mentioned that there's a few other characters.
Yep.
If you let me put you on the spot here, if you'd had a few more pages, right? So we've got Hulk, we've got Amadeus Cho, we've got we mentioned She-Hulk, Abomination's in there, Thunderbolt Ross, Red Hulk is in there. If you had space for one or two more characters in the Hulk family, who else do you think you would have added? Is there anyone that springs to mind?
Well, it's interesting because he's also in the Avengers. Rick Jones always pops up.
That was the one I thought. I was surprised not to see Rick Jones in there.
But I mean, there's, it's interesting because there are some stories that deal with him, but he became other characters. I mean, he's prominent in one when he's Abomination,
Mhm.
but you had to focus on the Hulk, you know? It's Hulk all the time. It's She-Hulk, it's Amadeus, it's really about him. And like I said, Rick is there, and he's in a lot of the stories actually. So he's sort of like a constant presence. You know what I mean? How about you? Was it Rick or was it somebody else?
Yeah, no, it was Rick. But then, hearing you talk about it, I'm like, yeah, you're kind of right. You almost have to do, and it would be interesting, right? You could do a book on Rick because started off as the Hulk sidekick. He's so integral to the origin of the Hulk. But then there was a time he was with Steve Rogers, and there was a time that he would switch places
Right,
in his own
right,
with Captain Marvel. So
right.
yeah, he's definitely had his time, and then it's kind of as a sidekick to the Avengers.
He's like the go-to sidekick
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah,
you know?
he definitely was. Well, we mentioned the reference, and you mentioned this can be a gateway into picking up the other stories. In the back, there is a sort of a big bibliography. Do you want to kind of tell people what that is?
Yeah, in the back, it's actually a creator list too. It lists the stories, it lists who did them, it lists what year it came out. Because one thing that Marvel does, you sometimes have to do a little bit of research because they do alter the formats of the trade paperbacks that come out. They actually, speaking of Tim Sale, they just released a large, oversized edition of, it's downstairs, so I'd show you, of the Tim Sale Spider-Man story. And they're doing it with all of them over time. So some of them may not be called what you think they'll be called. So you have to do a little research online and then find out what trades they're in currently.
Yeah, it can be hard. I talk about it on the show all the time, especially with launching volumes. A lot of comic book publishing companies have gone to kind of a seasonal format, they call it, kind of following TV. So you're constantly getting new number ones, which
Right.
2, 3, 4. And if you say, oh, it's Hulk issue 3, well, but which volume, right?
And sometimes they'll end up in a big omnibus, focusing on one of the authors or the artists. So the stories could be in there. Or they could be a standalone trade paperback. So it's sort of all over the board.
Yeah, well, being a lifelong comic reader, when you sat down and said, okay, I'm going to do Hulk, was there a lot of stuff you had to go back and like reread in depth? Was there stuff you had read for the first time doing research for
Oh,
the
there's a lot of stuff I read for the first time. Like you, we have limited time,
right? Yeah.
and working in the industry, it's even more difficult sometimes. Um, I used to say that I used to read comics for pleasure. Now it's a job,
Yeah.
which is different. So there there's a lot that I haven't read. So yeah, there was like I never really like you. I never really read the Amadeus Cho stuff. So
Gotcha.
that was all new to me. So yeah, there's a lot of new stuff. And actually, one character I probably knew the least about as a kid, my go-to characters were Batman, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four. For some reason, I did not read X-Men. I don't know why back then I didn't. I love Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos, but Captain America, I never read a lot of Captain America, but he has become one of my favorite characters. Reading a lot of these stories for the first time, I had read Civil War and the death of Captain America and a few other things, but there is a lot in his backlog that I just never got to, just never had the time to do. Um, Secret Empire is great. I'm sorry, I'm segueing into the other books if that's okay.
Perfectly fine. It's so interesting because I was the same way. I never read X-Men until I probably was in my 20s. I don't know why. It just was one of those
It
things.
just happens. You got a life. You do other things. I've got a job. I got a family. I've got I travel for work. I do play video games, which takes some of my time. I also write, obviously. I have a graphic memoir that I'm working on. So there's a lot going on in your life. So you can be forgiven for not having read every comic imaginable.
Yeah, it would be nice to have the time. I wish I
Yeah.
had that time, but well, one last question, and then I'll let you go. That first question mark I mentioned it when we talked about a portal, Immortal Hulk. That question on the cover from Stan, man or monster? Which is it? And you explore that a little bit in here because you can't talk about the Hulk without. And I think there's even kind of a subtitle, one of the chapters, is it both? So where do you come out, man or monster on the Hulk?
He is both. And one of the I think challenges of writing the Hulk is that think about on the monster end. In most horror movies or thrillers, the monster is you don't see a lot of the monster. You don't see a lot of Frankenstein in Frankenstein. You don't see a lot of Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. You don't see a lot of the shark in Jaws. It's really minimal. But with the Hulk, when he becomes the Hulk, he's front and center. So to me, that's a little bit trickier writing to make him more interesting while he's out, smashing stuff up. But he's both, because you got Banner there. It's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You got Banner struggling. Because I said the other day on a radio show, I said, we all have a rage monster in us, and we all have to learn how to control that. And Banner is the control, and he hates it. So it's both. He's both. How
Yeah,
about you? What do you think?
I do think that's why he's endured as a character because you can go so many different directions with it. You can focus on the man, you can focus on the monster, you can focus on duality. It's relatable because we all have anger issues at times. We've all lost it at one moment or another. And different writers have flipped it. They flipped it where I think it was late in the Peter David run where when when he was Banner, that's when he was out of control and was unthinking and was
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, there's that real. I think Gary Frank did the cover, and Banner's in a straitjacket and he's like snarling and there's like spittle flying everywhere and it's
Yeah.
fantastic. So
One funny tidbit I did notice reading a lot of these is Banner spends a lot of time in diners.
yeah, well, when you're on the road,
Yeah, take a look at that. He goes to a lot of diners.
yeah,
He'd fit, right in New Jersey here.
yeah, especially in I mentioned that John Romita Jr., Bruce Jones era, and in your book you talk about it as the return of the monster. And that's again when he's kind of out on the road, Mr. Blue, Mr. Green, what have you. And yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of diners in those issues for sure.
Yeah.
So well, Rich, I love the book. Like I said, I can't wait to get myself a hard copy, and I'm probably gonna have to check out Captain America and the Spider-Man one as well. Look forward to the
Great.
event. So thanks for the time. Best of luck with sales on the book. And yeah, anything else you want to share with our listeners? Is there someplace on social media or online where they can follow you and know when these things are coming out?
I don't use Twitter, I admit it, for a variety of reasons. Um, Facebook is, for me. Oddly, I use LinkedIn a lot where
Gotcha.
I post stuff, and I get a lot of people looking at it on LinkedIn. So yeah, I'm a little bit of a Luddite. I don't do Instagram either. So
Fair,
I leave that to Marvel. Let
fair
them
enough. If
promote
you
it.
can avoid social media, you're probably probably better for your mental health. So
Yeah.
okay, everybody, go check it out. Hulk, World Breaker, Hero Icon. We didn't go into too much detail, but you can check out the Captain America, Avenger Hero Icon, or Spider-Man Web Slinger Hero Icon. I look forward to the upcoming Avengers book that will cover a variety of heroes. So again, Rich, thanks so much for your time. It's been great chatting. And to all you listeners, want to thank you for joining us as always. We appreciate the support, and we'll talk to you next time.
My pleasure, Chase. Take care.